Okay, so before we hop into the enumeration section, let's talk about a few more things here I wanted to show you guys. So we also have, when we're looking at our command prompt and so forth, remember we talked about netstat and so forth, but let's say I use the ping command, we talked about ICMP a little bit. Actually, I'm going to do my loopback address of 127.0.0.1. As you can see here, we're getting a reply back, and the reply is indicating that it's alive and well, right? That it's replying back to ICMP requests. And interestingly enough, let me see what I can do here. I can manipulate the ping command a little bit and do something like ping minus L 65500, for instance, with 127.0.0.1 with a minus T. And you notice anything different here between the two currently? Well, one is it's a continual ping using the minus T option. Secondly, if you look over here, everything else is the same, the 127.1. The bytes, you notice here we have 32 bytes. We have 65,500 bytes here. The time here and the TTL are all the same. So the only difference is here is the allocated bytes that I'm sending over with my ICMP requests. Now back in the day, something like this was actually called the ping-a-death attack. And the whole purpose of this was to overwhelm the devices that it was going through or to basically cause some type of denial of service against it and so forth by overflowing what it could handle. Now this attack generally doesn't work anymore, so you won't be able to use it. However, you could use something like this to figure out what is allowable to that device. Because what happens is if you, let's say we did this on, let's say we, instead of 127.0.0.1, let's say we wanted to do something like, I don't know, let's try yahoo.com. And what you'll notice here, it's coming back with nothing, timed out, right? However, if I went in and I tried something like 1500 even, you'll notice we're still not getting any replies. So let's try something a little bit lower. How about 500? And you notice here we're actually getting 500 back. So that basically tells us that between 1,500 and 500 bytes is what's allowable on the yahoo.com site when we're actually pinging it. So what you could then do is actually go back and forth and just go up to 600, 700, and just figure out what is allowable to that server in this case, and so forth, and whatnot. So as you saw, though, when we tried it with the 65,500, it definitely came back with request timed out. So that would be basically saying we're doing a ping-a-death attack against Yahoo, right? Which is not something we want to do. But this is how you would basically go through and try some of these things out, right? On how to do that. Again, it's called a ping-a-death attack. Pretty straightforward when it's with its use and so forth, and it's pretty cool stuff. Now, other things you may want to take a peek into is the name of different types of attacks that occur. So when it comes to, let's say, doing a Smurf attack, so when you hear that term Smurf attack, what it's basically doing is it's an attack where we're sending ICMP packets across the network. Right, so we're getting flooded with ICMP packets. That's called the Smurf attack. We have another one called the Fraggle attack. And the Fraggle attack, basically, you're flooding the network with UDP packets. We also have what's called a SYN flood attack. And here, obviously, we're providing the network with SYN packets. We're flooding it with SYN packets. And then what happens is when you send out SYN packets, it will, of course, come back with the appropriate SYN acknowledgement packets. However, it will never complete that three-way handshake, right? And it won't even send a reset back. It just won't reply. And what happens is on the target, it ends up holding on to that SYN packet, right? The SYN acknowledgement, it is expecting a response back from the source, saying, hey, I've received your SYN acknowledgement. And it will hold it for roughly 75 seconds. So in a sense, you could, for instance, cause a denial of service attack using a SYN flood attack, and where you're basically overflowing the queue on the destination computer or your target computer by having it hold on to the SYN acknowledgement response, and you're waiting for that response, and with that you can fill up the queue and do things like that. Right, so those are some of the different types of things. Now we talked about the MAC flood attack, which the whole purpose of the MAC flood attack is to overwhelm the switch to act like a hub. Right, that's the whole purpose of doing that. Now another thing that we could mention here in this section is called the idle scan. Nmap has an option that has called the idle scan. And the whole purpose here is to use another machine to do the actual attacks from. So in a sense, we're pivoting our attack from our machine to another to the destination as our target. And that pivoting computer we're using, that idle machine we're using, is called a zombie PC. Not a zombie PC like a botnet, but like a botnet, but more strictly for the idle scan section. And the whole purpose here is to relay information to our zombie that then forwards it on to the target. Now where things become important here is what's called the IP ID. And the IP ID information generally will indicate if, in our case, if a port is open or if it's closed. And we basically want to keep track of that as we go through. So you can imagine when we have a particular scenario where we want to find out if a port's open, obviously a port's going to respond, right, if it's open. So if we basically send an IP ID of a specific value and through idle scanning, right, the computer on an open port will respond back to the zombie machine, which will then respond back to the hacker machine. That means the IP ID will actually increment by 2 if it's an open port. Okay, if it's a closed port, the IP ID will only respond back with an increment of 1. Big difference. Make sure you know the difference there. Okay, and that's where that kind of comes into play when it comes down to this thing called the idle scan and such. All right. Again, if you have the opportunity, try it out and see what comes up with in regards to some of your Nmap results and so forth. And try different things, see what you come up with, and know your port numbers, because obviously we want to know port numbers so that way you can determine what services are actually running and so forth on that. All right, and that's pretty much the gist of that. Now we'll talk about some other tools here in a little bit as well, called hping, and you'll get an opportunity to see this again. We saw it in earlier practice demo stuff that I showed you guys. And what I would recommend there on the hping side is that you also try it out, look at some of the options that we have available for hping and some of the switches thereof, and use that. Now keep in mind that hping will use TCP instead of ICMP by default, so make sure you understand the difference between hping and Nmap. Okay, pretty straightforward overall once you figure out the differences there. All right, we'll try to lay it out all out for you. So again, if I asked you guys yet now to identify let's say if I wanted to do an Nmap scan to a machine that is not pingable, meaning that it's not replying to ICMP requests, right, with a reply, and it's coming back request timed out, how can I still scan it? And here, we can use what's called the don't ping option. And this would be done by using the -PN or -P0 as our option, and that basically means don't ping before you scan for the ports. It's called the don't ping, and it's -PN or -P0, and that basically means don't ping it before you scan for port numbers, because Nmap by default will only scan for port numbers on those machines that actually reply back to a ping response and such. All right? So pretty cool. Again, try it out. Just give it a shot, see what you get. And other than that, you should be able to answer any kind of Nmap questions. Again, knowing some of the different flag numbers, as in the flags, knowing the different types of scans. Remember, we mentioned different scans. Now, some of them you'll be able to identify. We mentioned, for instance, the open, half-open scan, the connect scan. There was another one, too, called the Christmas scan or the Xmas scan. And the Xmas scan basically has, it's referred to as the Xmas scan because it has it generally says it's using all of the available flags, right? However, it actually only uses the fin flag, the urge flag, and the push flag. And if you see anything with the fin urge push, that would be considered a Xmas or Christmas scan. All right, and everything else should be self-explanatory. If you see anything with a fin scan, you should know that it's a fin scan, right? If it's a null scan, for instance, it would have no flag set and things like that. But again, best way to find out some of those additional scenarios is to look up the manual pages for Nmap and look through that. At least take a good browse through and get yourself familiarized with the tool Nmap. All right, very good. Let's go ahead and hop on into the next section, which is going to be the enumeration side of things. So here we're going to be looking into the enumeration, which is basically going to be the process of obtaining network resources, usernames and passwords, services, and machine names. Information can be gained by enumerating banners, also referred to as banner grabbing, from FTP servers, web servers, and email servers. Now, hopefully you've got this down already. FTP servers, which meaning port 21. Web servers, meaning port 80 or port 443. Email servers, port 25. Right? We have the fully qualified domain names and IP addresses. Right? We have IP configuration of routers and servers, information from Active Directory using LDAP, your Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which runs on port 389. All right, we can also get usernames and share names available too. So here we're going to be showing you methods and tools used to perform enumeration, as well as some of the countermeasures to protect against this as well. So here we have a particular web server banner that we can get through using Telnet. Now, we can do this via Telnet. We can do this also via a tool called Netcat. But here, let's stick with Telnet for a minute. And with Telnet, we basically put in the web server IP address or name, and then we put a space in there with a port number, in this case, port 80. Now, there's two methods you can go about doing this. One is you can type in the get space / HTTP / 1.0, or you can type in head space / HTTP / 1.0. Hit enter, enter, and you should then get some results as you see here on the big screen. So on this particular one, we have a Microsoft IIS 5.0 when we telnet it into 10.1.1.201 at port 80. And then the results back, again, it's showing us 5.0 on the IIS. That's meaning it's a 2000 server. Now, I would also recommend that you know the differences between your 2000 server, your 2003 servers, your 2008 servers when it comes to IIS. IIS 5 is 2000, IIS 6 is 2003 server, and IIS 7 is going to be 2008 server. All right, and that's where that comes into play.